about 10 seconds.
Katie, are these Christmas colors or Madison?
I'm not going to disclose the goodness. I'd like to call to order the December 5th, 2023 meeting of the State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Dr. Jenner, Mr. Bess,
Here.
Ms. DeLosa,
Here.
Mr. Durham,
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Gastineau,
Here.
Ms. Hamel,
Here.
Mr. Mapes,
Here.
Moe,
Here.
Ms. Rentschler, Mr. Watts,
Here.
Dr. Jenner.
Here. And if someone could text Kristen, I just want to make sure she's okay with the traffic and everything coming in. I think
Oh, Monica said, yeah.
Oh, you're on it, she's okay, though, okay, good, good. Okay, let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the November 8th, 2023 meeting?
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Well, first of all, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, Happy Kwanzaa. Hope you all have a wonderful next few weeks ahead. You do have a little something special, and just want to thank you for all you do as board members. I mean, the hours that you spend serving Indiana, this is a small token of our appreciation, so thank you, thank you. I also want to introduce David Buzzy, who is known by many. David is our new executive director of the State Board of Ed, replacing Brian Murphy, who left last month. David also serves as the policy director, works on special programs at the DOE. Board, we will have a formal vote on that in January, so that will be ahead. And then I also want to provide an opportunity for the board to give a heartfelt thanks to Brian Murphy. I love that guy. He has been a colleague, an advocate, and a friend. I still text him almost every day. I don't know what he's thinking, but he is, and I'll invite the board if you'd like to say anything about him as well. You're welcome to here shortly. But what a guy, he served us very, very well. And David, I know that you're also talking to him from time to time too. David, you're going to do a great job for us, and we're looking forward to working with you. Since we last met, we have a lot of news to share. Shortly after the last State Board of Ed meeting, we named 2 Milken Educator Award winners. The first was Emma Donnan Elementary and Middle School Principal Kendra Randall. The second was Plymouth High School English teacher Josh Dingledon. We're going to highlight them more specifically in the Friday newsletter. There's a video that goes along with it. It's always fun to see their shock when they win these awards. It's a $25,000 check and a national award. It's major. So you'll be able to see through the video, it's a short video, but you'll be able to see their surprise, and we're just so pleased to celebrate these educators. We'll keep doing it. We also announced 102 Purple Star schools. These schools are awarded for their significant display of commitment to our service members, veterans, and students and families connected to our nation's military. That was announced on Veterans Day, and really proud of those schools. We also, as a state, and the board had a lot to do with this, as did a lot of stakeholders who were part of developing these. We won 2 national awards for a couple of things. We won national awards for the Indiana Learning Lab, which, if you recall, that was started right here in Marion County during COVID to help support teachers. I know a lot of superintendents came to the table, Pat, I think you were one of them. Philanthropies to figure out how can we build out an online portal during COVID to support teachers as quickly as possible so that we can keep student learning going. That was then shared with the department to say, hey, would you like to scale it statewide? There was a desire, there was an interest. That is now scaled statewide. We have nearing 50,000 users. It keeps going up. We've since developed not only a teacher arm or an educator arm, but a parent support arm. So a lot of really cool work happening with the Indiana Learning Lab. That's led by Diana Smith on our team. And the other one that got a national award is Indiana GPS, which I know sounds very familiar to this board because you created and affirmed it. And that is obviously a very nimble and transparent dashboard that we have for educators and community leaders, higher ed, business industry, to really connect early learning K-12 and what's happening post K-12. That will continue to improve, and it's exciting even to see what's ahead. State Board of Ed, do you remember, I think it was September, October, we showed you the chronic absenteeism data, which was really alarming for our country and for our state. And I shared with you that we plan to build out an early warning system, an early warning indicator that will be connected to Indiana GPS. That RFP has been awarded, so we're going to be in the process of building that out to be ready to go to pilot with some schools this coming semester, and of course start next 24-25 school year. Finally, we announced since the last meeting 72 recipients of the Competitive Science of Reading grant, and that will serve over 65,000 students. It's about a $15 million grant, and it just really helps support our schools and our educators to build out appropriate science of reading opportunities right there at that local level. So we have multiple other tactics that Carrie Polk-Meek, our director of the Literacy Center, is going to talk through today, but that is one that was just deployed since our last meeting. On that note, I will now open it up if there are any board comments.
Katie, I just want to second your gratitude towards Brian. He kind of shepherded me into the State Board of Ed in a very intimidating thing, I think, and he made me feel comfortable from day one.
I also want to tell Brian, thank you for all of the calls, late night, early morning, text messages, never made me feel like, oh my goodness, here she is again, you know, and then requesting information, additional information right on top of it, and just his mindset toward children and education is just top tier. And so I'm definitely going to miss him. He was not only my co-worker in this capacity, but he became my friend, and he will remain my friend.
Yes, sir.
I would echo everything. Been in education for over 20 years, and there are Happy for him, excited for him for his next step, but certainly, again, I miss him. But I will miss working with him every day.
Thank you for those comments. I know that after departing, Brian's on a vacation right now, so I bet he's not tuning in. I'm just thinking.
He's probably not watching.
So we'll make sure he gets to hear those comments. On that note, let's shift to public comment. Today, it looks like we have one from Chris Lagoni.
Board, thank you for the opportunity to speak publicly. I've provided you with a copy of the Why Rural Matters report. This report's generated each year at the National Rural Education Association and Fair Conference, and so I've provided copies with you. And what it does is it examines rural education policy in a lens of comparing rural to rural. And so I leave you with a copy and my contact information, and would ask to engage in this. It kind of ranks states based on areas of need, and a high ranking in this report is a bad thing. It's an area of concern, and so it identifies states with the top 10 most concerning policies and outcomes for rural students. Indiana is number 8 in the number of rural students we have in the nation. We have over 250,000, and we're a diverse population. 1 in 5 students in rural areas are diverse. We are concerned that we're number 11 in rural policy in the rankings from this report. So we'll make this an annual process. We hope to engage with you and other policymakers. Not in this meeting, we just came to kind of make you aware of it, provide you with a copy. I also have electronic copies I can provide you with, and hope to engage with you and use this data so we can improve outcomes, experience, and opportunities and equity for rural students. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Chris. Quite a few of us on the board live in rural Indiana. I'm one of them, Jefferson County, southern Indiana. I, like probably others, immediately flipped to page 106 to look at Indiana. So we're ranked 11 in the nation for rural. It looks like there are some positive areas, but also some opportunities for improvement, no doubt.
Right, that ranking is 11th worst, so it's the 11th most concerning. So in this report,
It
when
is?
yes, when
It
you
says we're
look,
leading.
it's a leading indicator, but we're number 11 in the most concerning. You don't want to be in the top 10 in this report. The report
Oh, yikes.
identifies areas of concern and states with the most need to address rural education policies. Louisiana, Mississippi, these are some of the states in the top 10, Oklahoma, North Carolina. We're right outside the top 10. We're number 11 in areas of concern. And our student expenditures are very high student to counselor ratios. I won't go into it. The purpose of today was not to discuss the report with
Yeah.
you, just make you aware with it. And I think I would like some opportunity to engage with you individually to explain the report in the areas of concern.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that I mentioned that so that you could share that piece. It'll definitely cause several of us to lean in a bit more knowing what you just shared. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this.
And just want to praise you for your work on the tough issues of student truancy. Our association's been very concerned about attendance and truancy, and
Yes.
just keep doing that good work and literacy.
Thank you, Chris. We will keep pushing for sure. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
The motion and second, any discussion?
Do I recuse?
You do.
No.
Oh,
Okay, yes, I have to
yes.
recuse on item AC. Item C for homeschool exits.
I think I heard you say A, C, and
C.
item C.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I am
Yes.
also going to recuse on,
Item C, BJ is recusing.
Dr. Jenner, I also
Yes.
have a recusal, and I apologize, my audio is going in and out. I can hear you all intermittently, but not consistently.
Okay,
I need to recuse on item D, I believe, the last item for the CTE approval.
Yes. Katie Moat, item D. Thank you, Katie. Other recusals? All right, and any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda carries. Thank you. So today, we have a really, really important discussion about grade 3 reading data. So I'd now like to invite Carrie Polk-Meek, our Indiana Literacy Center Director, and she is going to co-present with David Buzzy, our Policy Director. We look forward to hearing the reading data. Thank you.
Yes, thank you as always for letting me present today. Going to start with this
And
slide.
really quick, are we able to get it on this screen, or do we need to turn around and look at this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is the tricky part about this space. So, board members, whatever you're most comfortable with, you also have the presentation right in front of you. So, either way, thank you. We'll give board members a couple minutes to get situated. That's the only one that's still there. The outlier. No, I'm kidding.
I'm gonna go get comfortable.
Byron's gonna join you. All right.
There's a lot of slides there. I'm gonna get comfortable.
You're gonna get comfortable. Great. So then what we'll do is, sometimes we have discussion intermittently throughout the presentation. That's fine. Board members who are down here, the general public won't be able to hear your specific comment or question, but I'll do my very best to repeat exactly what you're asking or saying. So, all right.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you. Just wanted to kick off with this slide. You can see, obviously, in the picture, Dr. Jenner and Dr. Burke. Kimiana Burke, I'm sure that most people are very familiar with her. She led the Department of Ed in Mississippi, their reading initiative, and we have all heard about what is known as the Mississippi Miracle. Dr. Burke is very explicit about that. We had the opportunity to network with her. The department has a strong relationship with Excel in Ed. Many of us just attended the conference, the national conference, and I benefit from Dr. Burke consistently, who provides a lot of literature and support through the smaller network that she leads, that our department is part of. So just wanted to include her quote here. Illiteracy is one of the most solvable issues of our time. We have the research, we have the practice, we have to do what's best for our children. And that guides consistently the conversations and the work that we have at the Department of Education. So today's agenda, we are just going to start by defining some key terms. We're going to level set on our most current literacy data. I know David's going to include some third grade retention and current landscape information. And then I'm going to share some of the ways that we continue to proactively target the K-2 space in the state of Indiana. So we're going to move to defining some key terms. So just wanted to note that during the last legislative session, the department was charged with procuring a third-party vendor to verify that iRead is well aligned with the science of reading, and just noting that that study has been conducted and taken place, and verified that iRead 3 is well aligned with the science of reading. iRead 3 is an assessment that was developed in accordance with state legislation, and it measures those foundational reading skills through grade 3, and I know you're all very familiar with that. Who should participate in iRead 3? As you know, recently Indiana allowed for grade 2 students to opt in to taking iRead 3. Who else can participate? Grade 3 students who did not pass or did not participate in grade 2, and grade 4 and 5 students who have not passed, who have not received a good cause exemption. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about good cause exemptions for the board today as well. Okay, so as a reminder, what is a good cause exemption? A GCE actually serves to exempt eligible third grade students from additional iRead 3 testing requirements after receiving a did not pass on an assessment. Students who qualify or may qualify for a GCE include students with IEPs, identified English learners, and students who have been retained twice. Okay. The department has actually provided some very clear guidance in the last year relative to awarding GCEs. And one of the criteria that we set when case conferences, teams of teachers and parents, community members are making decisions for our students is to consider some of the following that's on this slide. So what reading interventions were implemented so far with a student? Have we really dug deeply into what we're doing with that student and asked the question about why the student hasn't progressed? What trends do progress monitoring show for the student? And in some cases, we're still asking ourselves if we're using the correct progress monitoring tools for those students. What other supports does the student receive? Are there things outside of the day, additional tutoring, Title I supports? How else are we augmenting their experience? And does the school implement research-based support systems? And again, do they know that what they're doing with our students is effective in moving the needle for them? Also, just wanted to remind the board today of all of the contingencies, the flow chart of you, if you will, of things that can happen if a student does not pass iRead 3. So obviously you can see if a student passes iRead 3, they're promoted on to grade 4. If a student does not pass iRead 3, there are a number of contingencies or a number of options that our schools might employ to meet the needs of kiddos. So one of them is that they will receive some targeted reading interventions. They will then take iRead 3 during the summer. If they pass, obviously they're promoted on to grade 4. If the student does not pass iRead 3 during the summer retest, the student may repeat third grade. And students retained twice are eligible for a GCE, and then students promoted to grade 4 with targeted reading interventions and support. So it is, again, feasible and possible for a student to be moved on to grade 4 having not passed the GCE. And so if you look at our other pieces of this, or iRead 3, if you look at the other pieces of this flow chart, you can also see that if a student is given is given a GCE because they have a disability, whether they're an English language or an IEP student or an English language learner, then they are just promoted on to 4th grade, and interventions and support are intended to be in place. And often during the decision to do a good cause exemption, the special education teacher will think about the individual plans for students or the ELL teacher to meet those needs in 4th grade. It is also possible in the state of Indiana for a student to not pass iRead 3. They don't qualify for a good cause exemption, and they are promoted on to 4th grade. Schools and districts that make that decision are charged with creating interventions and supports for that student as a 4th grader, and that student will retest. And that is an option that we try to capture a little bit in our reading plans. As you may know, by statute, schools have to submit reading plans every single year. And so we do collect some data relative to the kinds of interventions and supports that kiddos have been passed on that don't qualify for a good cause exemption. Okay. Going to move on to the next phase for the next start, the level set of the literacy data. I know that this is data that you're very familiar with. I've presented it myself on a couple of occasions, but I don't think that it's ever a bad thing to revisit it. We know that Indiana's literacy rates have been dropping for a decade, and we know that they were dropping well before the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that iRead 3 passage rates peaked at 91% in 2012-2013, and as you can see, we've made some growth post-COVID, but not at the rate that we need to meet the needs of all kids. We also are very aware, and again, I know that this body has heard this before, but again, it's so critical to remind ourselves that students who pass IREAD 3 by third grade are roughly 35% more likely to graduate. We know that nearly 1 in 5 Indiana third grade students is not proficient in key literacy skills. Proficiency rates for students increased, as I mentioned before, minimally in 2023. 2022 NAEP results for reading, 33% of Indiana fourth graders scored at or above proficiency, and 31% of eighth graders scored at or above proficiency. And achievement gaps persist for our most at-risk students. And it is also worth noting that Dr. Jenner and this department has set a very ambitious goal of 95% of grade 3 students showing proficiency on IREAD 3 by 2027. And later in the presentation, I'll get to share some of that work, including the Indiana Literacy Cadre and our current progress there. I think I'm ready to turn this over to David.
Yeah, now I want to dive into the landscape on third grade reading and a deep analysis that we conducted on the IREAD data. So in August, our team already presented the IREAD 3 results, so we're very familiar with this, and the big takeaway from August and those test results were that nearly 1 in 5 Hoosier students are not proficient in reading as demonstrated by IREAD 3. So that was the big takeaway then, but to start addressing that, we wanted to dive deeper into, okay, so we know these students aren't passing IREAD 3, but then what happens next? And so what I'm about ready to walk through is the result of that analysis of figuring out, after IREAD 3, where do we kind of go from there? So there's a lot going on in this slide, so I'll kind of unpack the different pieces that we're seeing. First, on top of the bar charts, you'll see the number of students shown to be not passing IREAD 3. As the previous charts have been showing, that's been steadily ticking upward for a number of years. So you can absolutely see the COVID jump up, but well before COVID, the number of not passing was steadily increasing. Next thing that we wanted to look into was what was happening with the number of good cause exemptions. So that's that gold bar, shows the number of students over time receiving those good cause exemptions. And that number is very significant because once a student receives a good cause exemption, they're no longer required to continue taking IREAD 3. So we have no holistic approach to monitoring whether or not they ever actually reach reading proficiency. We're sure some do, some likely don't, but we just have no way of telling because once they get that good cause exemption, we stop testing with IREAD 3. So that was one thing that we wanted to look into is how many students are we not continuing to test over time. And that also shows the impact of guidance. You can see from 2017 to 2021, the number of good cause exemptions was steadily increasing, but in one of the slides that Carrie presented, you can kind of see we're being more intentional of having schools thoughtfully consider good cause exemptions, making sure it was in the best interest of students. And so you can see in 22 and 23, the impact of that guidance where the number of good cause exemptions decreased a little bit from previous years because of that new emphasis and a little bit different guidance. So that's just a good way of showing how policy and guidance can impact implementation, impact the data. So that's kind of the trends on good cause exemption, but we wanted to do a next step deeper analysis. So the blue chart represents students who are not passing IREAD 3 and not getting a good cause exemption, and we wanted to know what happens with those students. So for example, in 2023, the 8,337 students who didn't pass IREAD 3 didn't get a good cause exemption, what's happening with them? So that's what this next slide unpacks. So the totals there are a subset of that blue bar from the previous slide. And you can see the green graphs or the green bars are those students that were retained in grade level 3, and the orange bars are those students who were promoted onto the 4th grade, even though they were not passing iRead 3 and did not receive a good cause exemption. And this tells a strong story as well, because you can tell when the statewide reading plan was first implemented early on between 2011 and 2012, when that policy was new, states by and large were retaining all students in 3rd grade who were not getting exemptions, who were not passing iRead 3. 2015 is a little bit of an outlier year, but yeah, you can see for the most part, students not passing were being retained. But then you can see for the 2017 testing year, again, guidance shifted, and you can see at that point, the bulk of students were being promoted to 4th grade now, rather than being retained at the 3rd grade level. And so this next slide just kind of combines those together, where again, you can see good cause exemptions, those not getting the exemptions, and then, yeah, each year of those students not getting exemptions, what's happening with those. But another big takeaway here is that you can see for the last several years, whether they're getting a good cause exemption or not, we are sending thousands of students onto 4th grade who have not mastered foundational reading skills. So I've talked through a few of the takeaways while I was walking through the data itself, but also wanted to highlight, just a key insights as we were unpacking this data. So as you saw from the data, Indiana's literacy rates have been dropping for over a decade, and that predates the pandemic. And there's no doubt that the pandemic had an impact on it. You could see that jump up, but well before COVID-19, our literacy rates were dropping. Another analysis that we wanted to do, because on these slides you saw that it was the number of students, not percentages. So we checked to see the grade 3 cohort sizes, and it's fluctuated a little bit since 2012. The cohorts have increased a little, decreased a little, but looking at 2012 and looking at 2023 grade 3 cohort had fewer students than 2012. So it fluctuated a little bit, but overall, Indiana has fewer students in the 3rd grade, but the number of students not passing iRead 3 has more than doubled. So that more than doubling is not a result of just grade 3 expanding. It's remained relatively constant while the number of students who are not passing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a takeaway that's coming here in just a couple pages. Stay tuned. And then you may have follow-ups.
So a few more takeaways. As you saw in the data, approximately 14,000 students in 2023 did not pass iRead 3, and of those 14,000, over 5,500 received that good cause exemption. And again, just to emphasize why that's so significant, once they receive that good cause exemption, we are no longer administering iRead 3 to them, so we don't really have any way of monitoring when or if they master reading at that point.
And then also, just full disclosure to the board and to the state, while a student, as Carrie mentioned, should continue to take iRead if they are moved on without a good cause exemption, because many of these students, they may be transient, they may be, right, we are not capturing all of that data either. And I want to just, again, full disclosure, because this data is startling. David's going to get into some more of the takeaways that I've already had the opportunity to dig into, but we have to urgently have some solutions on this particular issue.
So, and yeah, to drive home the point that was just made and to emphasize that when you're looking at those two charts together, based on our data analysis, for the last several years, whether a student is getting a good cause exemption or whether they're not, the bulk of those students are moving on to the 4th grade without mastering those foundational reading scores. So when you do the percentages, over 96% of our students who are not proficient in iRead 3 are being promoted to the 4th grade, again, without those key foundational reading skills that are really the building blocks for the rest of their academic career. And then another takeaway, as reading scores have decreased, retention has decreased as well. And again, just reemphasizing that point again, that each year thousands of students are moving on to the 4th grade who have not mastered reading.
I want to pause here and say, probably going through everyone's mind in this room and who are watching, immediately start to say, think about where does that blame rest? And I want to be very, very clear. Schools, in that flow chart, schools are following what's allowable today in the state. So schools are not breaking the rules on this piece. But this is something that, again, as we look at current state and we look at the implications when a child is moved forward not able to read, it really begs the important question that we have to face and discuss of what do we do proactively to really target K2, and Carrie's going to hit on that shortly, but also what do we do about this real challenge that we're facing with that 13,000 students not passing, and well, actually almost 14,000 students not passing, and then moving on, about 13,000 not able to read. Keep going, David.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this is information that many of you will be very familiar with, but yeah, we've outlined this data of what's happening and really want to drive home the impact that has for the student and why this is a big challenge that we need to tackle urgently. So students who are not achieving proficiency on iRead 3 have ongoing struggles with text complexity, engagement in school, research components, writing skills. So we just know as they continue on through their academic career, it leads to challenges. As we analyze Indiana's data, it also indicates that those students receiving the good cause exemption have lower proficiency scores on subsequent iLearn assessments. So as they continue to take iLearn throughout later grade levels, they struggle with iLearn. And we notice that for the good cause exemption population of students. And then just overall, when we're examining the data on students not passing iRead 3, again, we noticed that their chance of scoring lower on iLearn dramatically increased if they did not pass iRead 3. And then looking at long-term impact data, they were far less likely to graduate. And Carrie kind of hit on that earlier in the presentation as well.
You can, and I'm going to add one quick data point that might be helpful for the board to consider that is captured in our press release, but I don't see it in our presentation, so I'm just going to read it. There was a national study completed in 2022 called Holding Back to Move Forward, the Effects of Retention in the Third Grade on Student Outcomes. One of the states specifically studied was Indiana, and it showed that third grade retention increased achievement in ELA and math immediately and substantially, and the positive effects persist into middle school. Being retained did not have a negative effect on school attendance or disciplinary incidents in later grades. I say that because there's no doubt this is a tough topic. No question. But we know from our data what happens when children cannot read by the end of third grade and they move forward. And so that's broken right now. And we have to figure out how, as a state, to fix that. BJ.
Or do we have those students that graduate? Do we have a breakdown of what diploma type those?
We're working on getting, so that request is into our data team. And yeah, each time we show this.
That will be telling to me as much as the students that didn't graduate.
Yeah, and obviously, we only have a couple years data on that because looking at 2012, they're third graders. So I think it's 2012 and 13, and we're looking to see if we would have the 2014 third grade cohort. So it's going to be 2 or 3 years of data. But yeah, we are working on pulling that.
And if you look at the fact that we would only know from the 2012-2013 third grade cohort because they have graduated, remember those two cohorts, we only have data with either good cause exemptions or retention. We do not have longitudinal data on that other major significant delta of students that are just moving on without either. The other correlation that I think the board will definitely be interested in, the general public will, the schools will definitely be interested in, is we're also trying to look at the correlation of chronic absenteeism, right? Are the students who are not achieving proficiency in reading by the end of third grade, if you remember back to when we presented the chronic absenteeism data, in Indiana, it's an inverted bell curve. So our biggest challenge areas are high school and K-1-2 for chronic absenteeism. And that's missing over 3.5 weeks of school. So we also really want to peel that back and understand our students who are not able to read, while we're investing millions of dollars in our teachers, we also must understand if these students are coming to school. So that is another data piece that is going to be forthcoming. But as we usually do, we didn't want to hold this data back. We wanted to put this out there, and we'll bring additional data to the board, to the general public, as that's analyzed. Yes, sir, William.
Quick question. From the lens, my question is from the lens of a parent. So of the over 96% of students who did not pass IRE that were promoted to 4th grade, was there parental voice in that decision? Because as a parent, if my child did not pass, I would strongly consider retaining my child. So was there parental voice in that decision?
It's a great question. Almost always, schools would have that conversation with parents and families. I think the data that we're sharing today and really studying this piece of Indiana's puzzle here on literacy, is there some additional takeaways that maybe we didn't have in front of parents. Like, we now know some of the impacts on if a child moves forward not passing IRE 3, they will likely never pass iLearn, period. We know that, right? So there are a number of data points that now we know more, and I think we have to provide that information to not only our parents and families, but also our educators. I mean, all want to do what's best for kids, so while we're being very proactive in K-2, we also want to look at that longitudinal data. Erica, I see you leaning in. I don't know if that's...
I was in agreement.
Yeah.
Being able to provide that language for educators to have that discussion with parents so they're aware of, because some parents push. They push to move their kids forward, and then you have some that are very supportive of retaining their children based on them wanting to be able to learn how to read and make sure they're proficient. But even just making sure schools have that language to provide to parents so they can share that data with them, I feel like will really be helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, this has to be an effort, to your point. This has to be an honest effort with educators, parents and families, policymakers. Absolutely. Thank you, Erica. Iris.
Just a curiosity, do we have any data on adult illiteracy in the state of Indiana? And to me, this is a societal, holistic issue, not just a school and teacher-parent issue.
Yep.
I would just be curious to know what's happening in the state holistically.
Yep, we do.
Okay.
That's not something that the Department of Education has.
Sure.
Typically, Department of Workforce Development, or even our, and I'm trying to think of the exact agency name. It's our correctional. It's our agency that works directly with our prison system. Say it again.
DOC.
DOC, thank you, Department of Corrections. They would have a level of data that we could pull. There are longitudinal adult implications. We know that based on a lot of data on the student can't read by the end of third grade, the implications that happen later. We also know that the bulk of our prison population in America is illiterate.
Yeah.
And you think about when teachers talk about some of the increased behaviors that we're seeing in schools, there are a number of reasons why, by the way, number of reasons why. But part of that also has to do with, and I saw this directly as a teacher, when a child is sitting in your classroom and is unable to read, It is mortifying when they're in 9th grade. It's so embarrassing. And so they're acting out because because they're embarrassed. And so there's a number of other implications there that teachers are seeing in our classrooms.
Well, and I wonder how many parents also can't read, but are, I don't know, I just feel like there's room for partnership with other entities, and agencies to get this together.
We did have, and I think DWD would be comfortable sharing, their person who's in charge of their adult learning grabbed me a couple, 3 months ago after a meeting and said, we want to make sure our adult teachers are trained in science of reading as well. And again, it's to address Iris, exactly what you're talking about our adult population who is illiterate. Maybe that's a future presentation opportunity for the board to hear. Thank you for asking that. Byron, welcome down there.
Every time we hear this data, I always bring this up because it's interesting. We always show the NAEP data, and we showed it here, 4th grade for 35% for the reading, right? So then my question always becomes, I'll ask my annual question, we show 89.1% passing iRead. Can those kids read that 89.1%? And if so, why do we have such a drop in NAEP? And I realize we're comparing statewide data to a subset, so I get all that, right? But that much gap in a subset data is not, something's not right there, right? So have you dug into that at all? I just think that's interesting data that probably could tell us something, right? Why do we go from 89.1 passing iRead to a 35% on our NAEP scores for 4th grade? And I think there's lots of things in there probably because we've moved kids on, we have I get all of that, but I just think that's interesting data that maybe should tell us something.
So this is a frequent conversation that I have with a couple of legislators who ask similar questions that you just did, Byron. So thank you for bringing that up. The one thing I think it's really, really important for us to remember as a board, as a state, is every assessment is uniquely different, right? So often we have in Indiana people who will review iLearn data and say, well, why is Indiana's data different or worse or better than Ohio or Illinois or Michigan or Kentucky? We all have different unique assessments, testing different levels and different components. The other piece is with NAEP, we see our NAEP percentages more aligned to our iLearn percentages. And I think that was a conscientious effort several years ago before I got here. Some of you were on the board at that time on the rigor there. We will absolutely ask our researchers the question that you just did and get a clear answer there. The one thing, though, that I continue to push back anytime, whether it's General Assembly members or others who say, well, we need to make iRead more rigorous, or we need to change iRead, or we need to, I always try to remind people, iRead is the only longitudinal data point Indiana presently has on children. Academic, because we have adjusted our summative assessment multiple times, are about to build through year again. But I think to your point, Byron, iRead 3 is assessing foundational reading skills. It is, so having almost 14,000 students not having even the foundational reading skills is tough, but it's, we'll be glad to ask our researchers some additional questions that may be helpful to you and the general public.
But we're confident that the 89.1%
Oh.
can read.
I mean, that is the assessment that shows foundational reading skills in Indiana, that we have had multiple reviewers. Most recently, we just got back another review that affirmed that that is an excellent assessment and aligned to science of reading. I believe that there is always opportunity to think about how we can continue to assess and triage learning. So I'm never going to say something is perfect, but what I'm saying about iRead is it provides us a longitudinal look, especially with the COVID learning impact that we've seen nationwide. I think that that is incredibly valuable right now, that Indiana does have that data point. Thank you for that question, Byron. Scott?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments in a question. The first comment is going to be more doom and gloom. The second one is hopeful, right? So the doom and gloom, in 2010, I had the opportunity to create the adult high school right here in Indiana, right?
Hey, Scott, pull your mic in just a little bit.
Through the Excel centers, and then subsequent Crystal House doors. And both organizations done a great job. What we knew with the adults who came into those schools, the most common theme throughout was really, really poor reading skills. So we spent a lot of time with the adults teaching them how to read for content. And looking at the data, the doom part of this, just like we knew COVID, I remember meetings past, we said, hey, look, those kindergartners, first graders who were sitting at home on Zoom, we're gonna pay the piper. And you could see in 21, 22, 23, we are indeed paying that price. That first significant dip, call it 17, 18, those students are now freshmen in high school. The high schools in the state are going to pay the price on that. We are going to see that in the next 3 to 4 years in grad rates, in college acceptances. All of those things are going to hit us, right? And it's going to hit even worse when the three groups you see post-COVID. So my challenge would be to policymakers, legislators, is you'd better be preparing for that. My friends at Crystal House Doors and Excel Centers, you better be asking for a lot more money, because you're going to need a lot more seats in the next 5 to 10, 15 years, because those students are going to be washing out of high school in numbers and coming back to you at some point in time.
I
Now,
think, I thought you were finished, Scott. Go
so
ahead, please.
Then the hopeful part.
Yeah. Can I respond just really
Please.
quick and add a piece to that? I think you're absolutely right. And I am frequently asked, whether it's, again, by stakeholders coming in or media, how many of our students can't read who are sitting in grades 4 through 12. And we are not clear-eyed on that as a state. We're not. And that is a big challenge. So this coming legislative session, I think there are going to be, you've heard both House and Senate have led on, we've got to address some of the reading proficiency, some of the data we're seeing. I think the governor has interest as well. We'll hear more from him in early January. But I do think that there are going to be a couple different conversations that come out, probably actually 3. One will be, what do we do about addressing kind of the proactive, that K through 3 point in time? Second question will be, what do we do about the students sitting in 8th grade who can't read today, or 9th grade, or 10th grade? Because if they, we know the impacts if we don't immediately triage them right now and make sure they're readers. And then the third one is, and again, you've heard me say it several times today, but what do we do about chronic absenteeism? Because as schools, we are absolutely going to do our part. We are hustling. We are working hard at making sure our teachers have those best practices. But the chronic absenteeism, we really, really need parents and families who are struggling getting their children to school. We need a solution found urgently and make sure they're at school every day. Let's go to the hopeful part, Scott Bass.
So now for the hope, because it's really, really early. So two things. Obviously, the department and others have done a great job on bringing in that the science of reading training for teachers, and we're a year-ish.
Yeah,
into
we're
that.
still early in that.
Very, very early. And we're also really early into a significant number of schools opting in to giving iRead 3 at second grade, giving them a year of supports, interventions. We just finished the second year of that in numbers.
Yes, sir. That was one of the way we've tried to triage this mountain that keeps
So
going.
I think, so the hope is, again, it's really early, and we need to double down even more, because not every school is opting in to testing second graders on iRead 3. But the idea that you can, given the tools through the training of teachers, frankly, some of the mandated, like this is how you're going to teach reading. That idea of the early opt-in, we should start to see some results in subsequent years, right? Because we'll have third graders who have been in school, actually been in school, accepting chronic absenteeism, actually have been in school kindergarten through third grade, right? So they didn't have a Zoom year. We'll see that. We'll see the results of some of those early interventions, and we should start to see some of the results of the science of reading. Now, all of those things have to happen together, and I think the point of all that is there is no single answer to any of this, but doing the things we're doing should give us hope. We have to be careful we don't start making more radical changes. We have to give things that we've done time to work, but they also have to work, and that means really digging in. Are those things actually getting traction? Are we starting to see those third grade students this year who have good science of reading? Because we had the good anecdotes, right, from a couple of presentations or a couple of meetings ago, schools where we trained a bunch of teachers and they did these things and they saw their scores jump. We've seen that on really small sample sizes. We should have more.
Yes.
And that's where I think follow-on presentations on this, at this time next year, those schools that dug in on science of reading early, those schools that had second graders tested and did early interventions, we should start to see those things happen. Then it gives us a platform by which to say, no, everybody's going to do this, because that's the hope.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And as a reminder on that, iRead offered in the second grade, year one, again, we were trying to triage some of what we were seeing. Year one, we needed 30 to 35 elementary schools in Indiana to pilot it, to build out the on-track indicator. That first year, I think we had, over 250. And then the second year, which was this past year, we had 54%. 54% of all elementary schools opted in. We have 1,051 elementary schools, to give you a sense. So massive increase. When I'm out in schools, that is one of the big takeaways from the schools who are hitting the mark with kids. They leverage that opportunity all day long, because then you can when a child affirms that they have those foundational reading skills, you can triage the kids who don't. So that's been, we expect that number to continue to go up, and some have discussed, is that something that we require? Do we have iRead to be required in second grade so that all educators and all parents have access to if your child is on track or if your child's at risk? I've had some schools who've asked directly, can we have access to it in first grade? mainly because we have readers in first grade. I saw it this week when I was at, actually it wasn't this week, it was last week when I was in Martinsville. A student wrote something, it was amazing, first grader. Student wrote something on the wrong page for the teacher, and I said, oh, you'll have to tell your teacher to look at page 22 since you're writing it on page 20. So the student, first grade, writes, look at 22. All right, Martinsville, that's pretty good. But, I mean, we see that. So we're going to continue to listen to our schools and educators to understand what else can we do to proactively. So thanks for that bit of hope that you did share. David, you're still on key takeaways. You want to continue?
Yeah, I was just say, and Scott actually set this segue up perfectly, which is really great. So yeah, outlined some big challenges, the impacts that those challenges will have if unaddressed, and now want to pivot to some of the tools and initiatives that we're really spearheading to take on this issue. So I'm going to highlight one of the tools, and I'll turn it back over to Carrie, who will go over a lot of the initiatives that we're already championing and spearheading to address this. The tool that we're working on is online interactive dashboard that the good cause exemption data that I was showing, the promotion data of third grade, fourth grade, all of that is coming from this visualization that we already have in development. And we really see it as a powerful tool both to show the challenge that we're facing, but then also monitor progress as we do stuff to tackle that challenge. And so yeah, exactly like Scott was saying, hopefully we provide this data tool for everyone. And so the data that we already unpacked is all at the state level, but this tool will be able to filter by school corporations. So it will give a tool for schools, educators, parents, students, community leaders to come together and look at their data for their local schools, for their community, and again, be able to see where their biggest challenges are, but then also as they work to implement strategies and initiatives at the local level, they'll be able to use this tool to see, are we making an impact on the data? And at the same time, we have a number of statewide initiatives that are already in the works that Carrie is about ready to talk about. We'll be able to use this tool, to Scott's point. We'll be looking at this data, and year after year, is what we're doing making a difference? Do we see the number of students not passing declining? Do we see good cause exemptions going down? All of that. So yeah, this would be really powerful both for statewide policymakers, but then local policymakers to be viewing the same items and knowing is what we're doing working.
So David, to just really simplify, it's a state of Indiana, it's a heat map on reading. Where do we need to triage the most? Where are we growing? Where are we still struggling? And that will be able to be disaggregated at the school level, all school types, non-pub, charter schools, and traditional pub. That is, that will be released very soon. And our plan is to share the data with the school leaders. Likely the fastest way to get it to our school leaders is through like Excel documents. So we'll send that, and they should have it already anyway, but we'll be able to send that ASAP. And then the dashboard, we're looking at that in January.
Yeah, with that, I can turn it back over to Carrie to talk about the other proactive initiatives that we're spearheading.
Thank you, David.
Okay, so certainly this is never a topic that I don't want to talk about and always share enjoying. So just as a reminder, I do lead the Indiana Literacy Center. The Literacy Center was created as a result of the endowment, and right now we have 5 humans that carry out the mission of the Lilly Endowment and the department, obviously the Department of Education, and one of our primary focuses is the Indiana Literacy Cadre. So just looking at this historic literacy investment, having just, again, came from Atlanta just a couple of weeks ago, it is unheard of what we're doing in Indiana relative to the work with the Lilly Endowment and some of the other initiatives. So $60 million from the Lilly Endowment to the department. We had, prior to that endowment, to that grant, had began the process of using ESSER dollars, $26 million, to start the initial Indiana literacy cadre. And we know that the Lilly Endowment is just finishing up their last grant cycle with an allocation of $25 million, which will be given to EPPs for the implementation of the science of reading.
Educator prep programs.
Yep, educator prep programs. Plus an additional $60 million during the 2023 legislative session, increasing the state's historic literacy investment to over $170 million. And I'm going to talk a little bit more precisely about how some of those block grant dollars from the last session are being used. So how to be part of the solution. We are currently, and it's hard for me to believe, but we are currently in our recruitment for our third cohort for the Indiana literacy cadre. As you can imagine, the interest is overwhelming and in a really good way. We currently work with Marian University and SEL at UIndy as part of the Indiana literacy cadre. The team at the Literacy Center has been dedicated to working specifically with the schools that have fallen below 70% and will be joining the Indiana literacy cadre next year. And so are meeting at a regular cadence with schools from across the state to that end.
And I say that, I think, pause on that because I get asked a lot, well, if this is our data, how do we know we're triaging where we need to? What she just said, I feel like we've said on repeat, but it's not hitting enough, I think. That legislation that requires us to target the lowest 25% where students are reading either 70% below, and I say the lowest 25% of elementary schools. It's about 240-ish.
Yep.
That is providing that even though they could have opted in, that is providing the requirement that those teachers and students get the resources. So just so you all know that.
Yeah. Another way to be part of the solution, as we've mentioned, is to administer iRead 3 at grade 2. If you're part of the Indiana literacy cadre, that's a requirement as part of the one of the assurances. But obviously continue to encourage schools, even outside of the Indiana literacy cadre, to take advantage of that really powerful resource. Some other ways to be part of the solution is to complete those science of reading modules. Dr. Ann Elsner from Marian University presented on those modules. We, again, I feel like I use the word overwhelming a lot, but we have had an incredibly overwhelming response from educators, principals, administrators, district level superintendents even have asked to be able to take those 20 to 25 hours of science of reading modules. Of course, we are offering a $1,200 stipend to educators as a result of finishing that.
And when you say overwhelming, by the way, it's thousands and thousands of people are signing
We're
up
almost
for
at
these.
6,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we just opened it late August.
Yep.
So it's like, yeah, very popular.
Yeah, very popular and very critical.
We initially did, Pat. We initially were doing a rolling entry, mainly because of technology and it being new and not wanting to overwhelm and crash a system. The team has heard from educators to say, hey, I'd like to do that right now and not be on a rolling based on when I signed up. So we are expediting that. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Yep, we'll be able to provide a very concise answer for that in the middle of next week for educators. Yeah. Receive targeted support through the literacy support plan. And that was what I had mentioned earlier, just relative to joining the Indiana literacy cadre for those schools that fall below 70% on iRead 3. We just sent out a memo last week about the literacy achievement grant from the budget last year. Over the next 2 years, we had $10 million that we are going to send to schools for their good work in improving scores in the achievement in iLearn. And so those were announced, and we'll be distributing those by the middle of December. And then, of course, we'll do it again next year.
And that methodology, because we've been asked, it contemplates demographics. It contemplates poverty. It contemplates some of our most at-risk student populations in the methodology and the distribution. So that money will go out, and then local superintendents will have the opportunity to make some decisions about distribution being targeted to specifically those focused in their buildings on reading.
Yep.
Yes, sir. Great question.
I believe, and I'm not Lynn, but February. Yeah.
Yeah, let me repeat that question. Mr. Mapes asked, sorry, I'm distracted by calling you Mr. Mapes because I never call him that formal. I'm like, what did he just say? I just called him Mr. Mapes. Pat, say your question.
What's the deadline for school corporations to opt in to iRead 3 at grade 2?
Yeah, and I believe there's a February deadline on that.
Yeah, February deadline, but we're glad to double down on that in our weekly newsletter and make sure
Absolutely.
that's highlighted.
Yeah.
And probably to that point, because again, reading and rethinking high school, going into 2024, let's be clear, those are the two topics we're going to hit on over and over and over again. In addition to a few others, certainly, but we'll keep the board very updated on what our data is showing, number of teachers, number of students impacted, et cetera, number of schools who sign up, et cetera.
And then, as Dr. Jenner mentioned earlier, we did announce in November the first round of IDOE Science of Reading grants, and those were given to schools. And it was a competitive grant, so not everyone that applied received the grant funding. But really excited and happy to see how our schools are going to move forward with their grants. All right. Thinking about other ways to be part of the solution. As schools continue to utilize IDOE's Science of Reading grant funding to support the Science of Reading implementation through instructional coaching, curriculum, and professional development, the department had also, through Scott Bogan's team, had announced all higher educator preparation programs are also eligible to apply for a grant. And that grant will allow them to focus on educating their pre-service teachers. So they are getting high-quality Science of Reading aligned instruction that will allow them, as required after June of 2025, or June 30th of 2025, to pass that literacy endorsement. So just also reminding from the last legislative session that beginning in July, Scott and his team will begin a very careful review of EPPs and their alignment to the Science of Reading. And Dr. Jenner's been very clear about our response.
Very clear.
Very clear.
I mean, as
about
a
our
board,
response.
I'm going to tell you, we will recommend educator prep programs to be on probation if we need to. If they are not effectively training our teachers in Science of Reading, I will bring that recommendation to you. We have no time to waste. Our educators are typically paying thousands of dollars to get that education so they can best serve kids. And by the way, many of our higher eds have been very, very responsive, very willing to partner. I've talked directly to President Pam Whitten, who is all in at IU. Talked directly to Purdue University's president about this. I've talked directly to Marian University's president, to Ball State's team, Indiana State's team. I mean, they know the level of expectation we have. We have no time to waste. In fact, Pam Whitten sent me an article yesterday on Science of Reading. Like, they are with us. They are with us, and yet we're going to hold our bar high to make sure our educator prep programs are doing what we need to prepare our teachers.
Absolutely. And I can't say enough about the Lilly Endowment's work with that $25 million allocation to the EPPs. and their ability to think about their alignment, both planning and implementation, which has been incredibly powerful relative to their new requirements that begin next year.
I have a question on the college prep programs. Just at the point in time we're at, for the field, for people who are doing hiring, and to keep it on a positive note, highlight for the field, here are the teacher prep programs who have been doing science of reading. So when you're hiring new teachers, you know that they've had that instruction versus others who, again, to their credit, are planning to shift and move and are all in, but they had not been. And I think it'd be important if, again, I've had to hire elementary teachers, but if I'm hiring an elementary teacher, I want to know that I don't have to have them get retrained in how to teach reading, that they've been trained in the right way. I just think that would be good information for the field to know, here are the programs that have done it. No implication on the others, but here are the ones who have done it, so you could be sure that those candidates coming out have had that background.
Yeah,
So
that's a great point, Scott. So we are in that gap to where, as a state, July 1, 2024 is when all higher ed institutions have to have the Science of Reading course developed. They will teach that 24-25, July 1, 25. That will be a requirement for teachers to have in their license. By the way, the board will bring that assessment to you in January. So in the interim, because it's a really good question, in the interim, NCTQ, the National Council for Teacher Quality, NCTQ does an evaluation of schools who submit the information to them. Many of our Indiana schools did submit the information, and by the way, we have varying results today. Now, I really believe those results will improve. The only A+ we have in the state is Marian University in terms of NCTQ. But that report is publicly available. And I know media has covered that, others have talked through it. But we as a state will be able to triage more soon.
I would like to add that since 2010, the Science of Reading has been in the education prep program requirements, and they were to be all up to date by September of 2013. And here we are 10 years later, asking them once again to change in order to help the students in the state of Indiana in basic literacy skills.
Pat has some favorite points that we hear on repeat. I expect to hear that one again. Thank you, Pat. I won't mention the other ones you like to repeat as well, sir. Yes, Byron.
I'll wait on you so I don't get scolded. What, to the point on the higher ed, where are we on alternative certification programs? Are we checking that along the way as we go? Is there a procedure on that piece as well?
Yeah. We are actively moving on that, alternative options. And maybe that's a future presentation that we could do for the board. I have a couple things that I want to say to that, Byron, but I want to fact check myself first with the team. So thank you for that question.
Can I ask one more
Sure,
quick question
Iris.
on higher ed? Do we have, besides president's buy-in, do we have insight into the levers that can be pulled if there's tenured faculty not following this and buying into this?
So it's a really important question. So this is where, I'll just speak frankly, this is where I am so thankful for the Lilly Endowment. They have been an excellent partner as they're deploying $25 million to support educator prep programs and higher ed, asking those exact questions of presidents and provosts and deans of education. If you have a rogue professor, what are you doing about it? I think that it's an important question. Anytime that, just full disclosure, anytime that I get a call from whether it's educators, other stakeholders who have heard people on panels, if the information being shared is inaccurate or misleading, I almost always make the call straight to that university president or their legislative team to make them aware. Because if teachers are making us aware of the concern, we need to be very clear with the university that maybe that person doesn't need to be on public panels anymore. Maybe you need to take a look at what is being taught in their college classroom. So we're working very hard at that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and just a few other items to share about how to be part of the solution. Coming soon, the department will be announcing the literacy endorsement to veteran educators. And I will pause on this one for a moment and just give a big shout out to Dr. Jenner on this one. It's very, very thoughtful. We know that recent legislation only requires the literacy endorsement for educators that are licensed after June 30, 2025. In an endeavor to really think through the benefits of having that 80 hours as prescribed in the statute, we are moving forward with offering that 80 hours for free to veteran educators. And not only that, paying them a $1,200 stipend and paying for the licensing exam for them to get that literacy endorsement. And so we'll have a bigger announcement around that following procurement, which is always a really interesting place to be in around March, if not a little bit sooner. So big deal, and that is something that we are actively engaging school districts, principals, administrators, teachers across the field in during any opportunity we have to be in front of them so that they're aware that that is coming. Also mentioned this already, I got a little bit ahead of myself, but Scott Bogan and his team did announce, and that closes at the end, or actually I think it's December 15th now that I'm thinking about it, grants to EPPs so that we estimate that there'll be about 5,500 educators who will leave that will be required to have the literacy endorsement, but will not have been prepared, would not have been required to be prepared by colleges and universities. So Scott's goal then is to allow for them to use that grant to purchase high quality, science of reading aligned, professional development to help with those pre-service educators. So that's a really exciting and gaining a lot of interest.
And that would hit on your question, Scott, earlier about what are we deploying to overcome the gap that we have until some of this is.
When we say at no cost, can we say at no cost to teachers? Because I do think that's important. And you mentioned that, but to see, when something free means someone else paid. So in this case, that is a department. So I think it's important to make sure that teachers see the departments jumped in with both feet in this.
Understood.
So and you certainly explained that, but it doesn't say that on here. So when we say it's at no cost to the teacher because the department has made that investment. So I think when they see it's important to you, all of a sudden it becomes important to them. So, and that may seem nitpicky, but I think I do think it's important.
That's good feedback.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
This is, everything that she's talking through is part of that $170 million, which again is public-private dollars.
Yeah.
So, yes, we'll make that clear. Thank you.
Coming soon, the high-quality curricular materials list aligned to the science of reading. That advisory list, we hope to have that published as soon as March. And our team is currently in the process of procurement to create a science of reading framework that will include dyslexia modules that will be available to all educators. So we can empower our early educators not only to think about what dyslexia means to their students, instructional strategies, And, the screeners that we give, what does that mean? What are our next steps? When we identify kiddos who have learning difficulties, what does that look like and sound like in our classrooms? So we're really, really excited about that. I don't have a date when I can say it'll be done, but we're close.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, board, this was a lot of information. My comms team, and I'm going to do it again, I've done it 3 times. They don't like when I use this example, but to me, this is the easiest way to think about this. Like in the morning, I stand on the scale to be really honest about where I am, and that I need to drink more water, and I really could go to Orange Theory more and exercise, and eat more fruits and vegetables, and a few less Christmas cookies, New Year's resolution. But I know that I have to do something directionally to improve it. Today, I hope when we look at this data as a state, this is us standing on the scale as a state. This is us standing on the scale and looking at our data and acknowledging that there's not one magic bullet here. There's not one magic solution. It's going to take multiple tactics, some that are proactive, some that are stopping or slowing the significant number of students that are moving on without reading skills. Some we're going to need our parents with and making sure their children are getting to school. But the key is we have to work together. We have no time to admire the problem. We have to be 100% focused on solutions because we have kids, we have communities, we have Indiana at stake. On that note, is any other comments? Or DJ?
If I can, I've been on this board a long time, going back to 2012. So I hope as board members this hit home. Sucker punch. I mean, and I hope we feel that way about it, that when we remove consequences from students and expectations, which has happened, not currently, you see the impact it has on students. You saw the student performance that happened when my colleague down here was sitting. So our expectation has to remain high. And we're going to be put in a position to make difficult decisions, maybe sometimes unpopular decisions, and I hope that we are willing to make those, because you see when you do make those that student performance increases. I hope that we keep that at the heart of every decision that we make.
On that note, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Happy holidays.
Do you like that?
You too when you're up.